Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, July 3rd. Wanted to kick off a quick little tropical update before you head into your long holiday weekend. We have Hurricane Barbara still churning out there in the eastern Pacific, and a look at what's going on in the tropical Atlantic, although there's not much. Just a little update on that. So here's a look at Barbara. Hurricane Barbara, Category 4. In fact, at a point overnight last night, it peaked to nearly Category 5. It is a powerhouse of a system. Still is. 145-mile-per-hour winds currently as of the latest advisory. Gusts up to 175. Now, as we have the satellite image freezed here, I want to show you a few things about this. We're looking at the infrared satellite imagery that tells us the temperature of the cloud tops. Well, when they are colder, higher, we're looking at the white shadings here, but notice something interesting in the last frame. It's not fully encircling that well-defined eye, meaning thunderstorm activity on the eastern quadrant of this particular system here is starting to let up just a little bit. That could be a sign that it is starting to weaken. Of course, it is expected to do so as it moves off towards the north and northwest as it encounters some slightly higher wind shear and also some cooler ocean temperatures. Now, in terms of the SAFFIR-SIMPSON scale, how we grade hurricanes on their strength of their winds, well, Category 4 is 130 to 156 miles per hour, sustained winds. Last night, it was up to 155, so it just missed Category 5 status by 2 miles per hour. Now, certainly you can argue the wind speeds because there's no observations being taken out there in the middle of the hurricane. We were just taking it from satellite observations. So an argument could be made that possibly for a time it did achieve Category 5 status, but for now, we'll talk about it as a Category 4. I mean, come on, 2 miles per hour, it's still a beast of a storm. Here's how it looks on the water vapor imagery, okay? This is showing us the moist air against the dry air. Dry air is going to be the yellow shadings, the moist air, the blues, the greens, and the whites. Plenty of moist air out there. That's not really the problem. What we look for some weakening is to get some of that dry air that gets pulled into the overall circulation and eventually into the engine and shuts it down a little bit more. We're not seeing that just yet, so still very, very strong system. Now, at a point in time yesterday, and overnight, the storm went annular. We call it an annular hurricane. Now, what is that? If you remember back to Hurricane Maria, and I think also a point in time Hurricane Harvey, and certainly Irma, it resembled that buzzsaw shape on satellite imagery. Well, this is what that is, an annular hurricane. And this is really kind of reserved for those very intense hurricanes and tropical systems. Now, we get a large and almost symmetrical eye. You saw that with Barbara. Little to no banding out there. Again, it's all very condensed. It's a very thick line of thunderstorm activity completely encircling the eye wall. We saw that there with number 3. And it tends to weaken more slowly just because it's a very well-working, well-oiled machine, and it's going to take a little bit more to get that to break down. So here's where it's going in the next several days, the 5-day cone from the National Hurricane Center, right? So Category 4 storm right now, generally weakening slowly as we head through the next couple days, still hanging on to a hurricane status in the forecast at least, right up through Friday morning at a Category 1 storm. So major hurricane for at least the next 24 to 36 hours. Now, way out past the 5-day cone, really right on the edge of it, approaching day 6, is Hawaii. Notice at this point in time, it is just a remnant low. It will weaken, maybe some showers, maybe some swells, making on out for the surfers. But again, Hawaii should be missing out on anything really destructive with this system, which is really dodging a bullet. So we see how strong the system is. We see how beautiful it looks on satellite imagery. But what enabled that to happen? Well, it was in a sweet spot in the atmosphere, really, and out in the ocean. It had a favorable upper air environment. Wind shear, as we talked about, the winds aloft were not very strong. When that occurs and a hurricane is developing, the thunderstorm grows vertically, right? If we have strong winds aloft, that blows the tops off the storms, and then the storm actually tends to die. We didn't have that, so the thunderstorms were able to build and grow no problem. On top of that, we had very, very warm oceans. I'm going to show you that in a second, but this is the wind shear. Notice nothing in the historical path, nice and clear, and really for the next couple days, not too terrible in terms of the wind shear. Now let's look back at the sea surface temperatures. I have it on here on a filter that shows just 80 degrees Fahrenheit and warmer in all the shaded areas. Notice its entire lifetime has been spent in that very, very warm water. 80 degrees and warmer is needed for tropical development because of the latent heat release. That heat is used as fuel. In fact, we'll look at ocean heat content now. Now, this is the available energy for these storms to use, right? We feed off of, not we, the storms feed off of these warm waters, and the ocean heat content extended down to a depth. Now with storms, as they move over very warm waters, they churn it up, right? It's very violent, something called upwelling. And if there's not enough warm water, eventually as that storm slowly moves across it, it'll upwell and churn up colder waters, which would in turn weaken the system. With this very deep ocean heat content, that really was not a problem with Barbara as it moved on through. So it's had plenty of energy to work with. And guess what? There's going to be another system coming up behind here, behind Barbara, that's going to take advantage of the same sort of atmospheric setup. Right now, it's got an 80% chance within the next 5 days of achieving the third named storm. Right now, it's known as Invest 94E. Not even sure if that designation is on it yet, but it likely will, and eventually it will be named Cosme, which is the sea name for the Pacific hurricanes for 2019 there, and then Delilah, and then Eric thereafter. All right, let's talk about the Atlantic. Again, there's not much here to talk about, but just a general overview of the infrared satellite imagery. Very, very quiet out there right now. There were a few areas we were watching yesterday. This is the tail end of a decaying cold front, and typically these are some areas we like to keep an eye on because sometimes they can spin up a little sneaky tropical system, but as you can see there, it's really died on out as it moved out into the central Atlantic. We do have a couple tropical waves, though, that have emerged off the coast of Africa. Doesn't really matter, though, because they are going to be encountering a lot of dry air. Here's a look at the satellite imagery in terms of the water vapor. Dry air, moist air. All the yellow, dry air. It's still a very hostile environment for any of these tropical waves to really start to develop. Certainly their seeds, we're planting the seeds, but it just doesn't have that fertile ground to kind of take hold out there. But before I end here, I want to remind you, 5 years ago, 2014, if you were anywhere along the eastern seaboard, you were worrying about a storm for your 4th of July holiday, and that was Hurricane Arthur. It made landfall through the Outer Banks of North Carolina as a Category 2 storm. How do I know? I was there in Nags Head when the eye passed right overhead with 90-mile-per-hour winds, and then it moved out to the north and northeast in the open waters of the Atlantic. It moved in, it moved out, and everybody got on with their holiday weekend. So that's it. You can find me on social media. If you have any questions or you like this video, share it with friends. Meteorologist Tim Pandajis on Facebook and 13 Tim Pandajis on Twitter. Have a great holiday weekend.